The cuffs went on my wrists in front of 300 guests, and the man who put them there was smiling. His name was Gala, head of a private security firm hired by one of the wealthier guests of the evening, and he had wanted to do this for about 40 minutes. I had not given him an excuse, so he had invented one. "Obstruction," he said, loud enough for the nearest tables to hear. "Non-compliance with a guest detail. You'll come with me." I did not look at him. I looked forward, the way I had been taught to look forward since I was 19 years old. The orchestra at the far end of the great hall kept playing, but the violins had thinned, the way music thins when a room begins to listen to something else. My name is Corporal Aldwin Vance, of the Household Foot Guards, and on the night I am going to tell you about I was on detached ceremonial duty inside the gilded ballroom of the House of Asterwin, at the annual charity gala for the wounded of the regiments. I had been posted at the inner archway since 6 o'clock, in scarlet wool, brass buttons, white gloves, the bearskin heavy as a small bell on my head, the rifle at my right side. I had not spoken in 5 hours. I had barely blinked. That is the post, that is the job. Gala was perhaps 40, broad in the shoulder, expensively suited, with the kind of self-satisfaction that only ever grows on a man who has never been told no. His earpiece coiled down behind a pink, freshly shaved neck. He worked for a guest, a textile magnate whose name does not matter, and his magnate had decided, halfway through the second course, to walk through my archway with a glass of red wine and 3 associates and a temper. The archway was not for guests. There was a velvet rope across it, and a small brass sign that said so in 2 languages. I had stepped 1 pace forward, raised my white-gloved hand, and said very quietly, "Sir, this passage is closed." That was all. The magnate had snorted, called me a decorative oaf, and turned back, but Gala, who had been 3 steps behind, had seen his employer's face and had decided that the decorative oaf was going to pay for that snort. He had begun small. He came back twice in 20 minutes and stood very close to me, breathing whiskey into the air just under my chin. He photographed me with his phone from 6 inches away. He waved a hand in front of my eyes. I did not move. I had been waved at by drunker, richer, more clever men than Gala in palace forecourts and on parade routes, and the answer was always the same. You do not move. You are not there to move. You are there to be the shape of a thing the country has decided to keep. When none of it worked, he leaned in and murmured, almost gently, "You think the uniform makes you somebody. It doesn't. It makes you furniture." Then he stepped back, raised his voice for the room, and announced that I had obstructed a guest and was being placed in custody until the head of household staff could address my conduct. He pulled the cuffs from a black leather pouch on his belt. They were real handcuffs, not plastic restraints, heavy, polished, the kind a man carries when he wants the sound of them to do the talking. He closed the first ring around my left wrist with a deliberate ceremonial click. He let the sound carry. He waited a beat for the room, then closed the second. I let him. I want you to understand that I let him. There is a thing they teach you in the first year of training, in a small, cold room above the stables of the regimental depot. They teach you that the uniform is bigger than the man inside it. They teach you that if you swing a fist in scarlet wool, you have not struck someone, the crown has struck someone, and the crown does not strike its own people in its own hall. They teach you again and again that your hands belong to the post, not to you. So when Gala closed those cuffs, my hands were not mine. They were the post's, and the post did not resist. I felt the cold of the metal first, then the small, embarrassed quiet that came down on the nearest tables. A woman in a green silk dress half stood, then sat again, uncertain. A waiter froze with a silver tray in his hand. The orchestra had stopped pretending to play, and the conductor had turned and was watching us over the top of his glasses. I kept my eyes forward, on the far wall, on the dark oil portrait of the old duke that had hung in this room for 200 years. I counted, in my head, the buttons down the front of his coat. There were 9. "Walk," Gala said, and put his hand on my elbow. I walked 2 paces, 3. He steered me along the marble, past the lower tables, past the rim of the orchestra pit, toward the side door. My boots were the only sound. The cuffs hung between my wrists in front of me like a small, polite apology I had not made. I could hear behind me the magnate's low laugh and a woman at his table saying in a clear, carrying voice, "Oh, do let them. It's about time someone." I have wondered since what I would have done if no one had been coming. I think I would have walked all the way to the side door and let him sit me on a chair in a corridor and waited for my sergeant. I think I would have given the post nothing to be ashamed of. That is what I tell myself. I will never know, because at the third pace, the great doors at the far end of the hall opened, and the field marshal walked in. I did not see him at first. I felt him. The room shifted the way a room shifts when weight enters it. Conversations did not stop so much as deflate. The conductor straightened. A general's wife at a center table turned her head an inch and went very still. Vol, behind me, slowed by half a step, because even men like Vol feel a change of pressure, even if they do not know what is causing it. The field marshal of the household division, the senior serving officer of every regiment that wore scarlet inside the walls of the Asterwin estate, was a man named Lord Halbrick Morniehall. I had stood guard at 3 of his lectures as a recruit and had never spoken to him, and he had never spoken to me, and there was no reason on this earth he should have known my name. He was 68 years old. He wore his formal dress that night, dark blue tunic, gold braid heavy as armor across the shoulders, a crimson sash from right shoulder to left hip, and on the sash 4 stars in a row, each the size of a thumbprint, each meaning something terrible and old. His hair was white. His face was the face of a man who had not been surprised by anything in a long time. He came up the central aisle of the ballroom without hurry. He did not look at me. He looked at Vol. And Vol, who had been about to take another step, stopped. "Stand still, please," the field marshal said. His voice was not loud. He did not need it to be. The ballroom went in 2 seconds from the small, embarrassed quiet of a moment ago to a complete listening silence. The orchestra had set down its instruments. The waiters had set down their trays. Even the chandeliers, the great gilded chandeliers of the House of Asterwin, seemed to hold still. He walked the last 12 feet to us, and stopped 1 pace from my left shoulder, where he could see Vol's face and the cuffs at the same time. He looked at the cuffs for a long moment. He looked at my chest, at the 3 thin ribbons above the breast pocket. He looked last at my face. I held my eyes forward, the way the post required, but he was so close I could see the white of his collar at the edge of my vision and the gold thread of a star. "Corporal," he said to me, not as a question, as a fact. "Sir," I said. It was the first word I had spoken in almost 2 hours. He turned his eyes to Vol. "You will tell me your name," he said, mild, almost kind. Vol told him. "And the firm you represent." Vol told him that. "And the guest who retained you tonight." Vol hesitated. The magnate at his table 30 feet away was suddenly very interested in the contents of his wine glass. "Sir," Vol said, recovering, "with respect, this guardsman obstructed a guest in the course of—" "You will answer the question I asked," the field marshal said in the same mild voice, "and not the one you wish I had asked." Vol told him the name of the magnate. "Thank you," the field marshal said. Then he turned very slightly so the whole room could see his profile, and he raised his right hand, and with 2 fingers he motioned to the door he had come through. 2 men in the dark green of the household provost stepped through that door and walked, with no urgency at all, the length of the ballroom. They were tall. They wore peaked caps. They had pistols at their belts that they would not need. "Mr. Vol," the field marshal said, "you are going to take the cuffs off Corporal Vance now. You are going to do it slowly, and you are going to apologize to him while you do it. You are then going to surrender your firm's license card to these 2 officers, and you are going to walk with them to the South Office, where the rest of this conversation will happen without an audience. Do you understand me?" Vol's mouth opened. It closed. His hand, when it went to his pouch for the key, was shaking very slightly. He found the small steel key. He fumbled it once against the back of my left wrist. He got the first cuff. He whispered, so low I almost did not catch it, "I apologize, guardsman." He got the second cuff. He said it again louder because he had been told to. The cuffs came off my wrists, and he put them back in his pouch, with the careful, embarrassed motions of a man putting away a thing he wished he had never owned. The two provost officers were beside him. They did not touch him. They did not need to. He surrendered the laminated card from his breast pocket. He walked between them the length of that ballroom, past 300 guests who had paid a great deal of money to be here and were now getting something they had not paid for, and out through the great doors. The doors closed behind them with a soft, final sound. The field marshal did not watch him go. He was looking at me. "Corporal Vance," he said, quietly enough that only I could hear, "step back to your post." "Sir," I said, and I did, 2 paces back to the inner archway. I set my boots on the marks I had stood on for 5 hours. I let the rifle settle at my side. I lifted my chin a 1/4 inch, the way the regiment liked. I looked forward at the dark oil portrait of the old Duke at his 9 buttons. The field marshal turned then and faced the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said. He did not raise his voice. He had not raised it once. "I apologize for the interruption to your evening. The man you just saw escorted out came into this hall under the impression that the uniforms standing at your archways are decoration. They are not. The young man in scarlet behind me has served 4 years in the household foot guards. Before that, he served 6 years in a regiment whose name I am not at liberty to give at a charity dinner, and which has cost him, among other things, the full hearing in his left ear. He has stood his post tonight in your service for 5 hours without a word. He has been insulted, photographed, mocked, and finally cuffed in front of you for refusing to let a wine-drinking guest into a closed passage. He did not move. He did not speak. He did exactly what his uniform required of him." He paused. The room did not breathe. "That uniform," he said, "outranks the man who put cuffs on it tonight by an order of magnitude that would, I think, surprise you. It outranks him because of what it is, not because of who is inside it. The boy inside it is a corporal. The uniform is the crown. And the crown is not handcuffed at charity dinners." I felt my throat tighten. I did not move. 5 hours of stillness held me upright. "The firm that employed Mr. Vall," he went on, "will not be employed in this house, or in any house of this division again. His personal license to carry restraints in any private capacity in this country is, as of approximately 90 seconds ago, suspended pending review, and I do not expect the review to be kind. The guest who retained him," and here he turned his head very slightly toward the magnate's table, without quite looking at it, "will, I am sure, wish to consider whether the charity to which he has so generously donated this evening would prefer his apology in writing, or in person, tomorrow morning at 10. The magnate looked for 1 short second as if he might say something. He did not. He looked down at his wine. "Please," the field marshal said to the room, "enjoy the rest of your evening. The orchestra will resume." Then, almost as an afterthought, "And the next person to mistake a guardsman for furniture will deal with me directly, and I will not be as polite as the corporal was." He turned. He gave me, in passing, the smallest possible nod, a movement so slight that no one else in the room would have seen it. He walked back up the aisle and out through the great doors, and the doors closed behind him too. The orchestra picked up the violins one by one, and after a long, uncertain breath the room remembered how to be a room. Forks moved again. A laugh, somewhere, started and died and started again. The woman in the green silk dress was looking at me with her hand at her throat. The conductor lifted his baton. The music came back, thinner at first, then full. I stood the rest of my shift, 3 more hours. No one came through the archway, no one came near it. At 11, the regimental relief arrived, and I marched out under the side colonnade and across the cold gravel of the inner court to the gatehouse where my sergeant was waiting. He took the rifle from me, looked at me for a long second, and said, "You'll have heard." I had not. "License pulled," he said. "Firm blacklisted across the division. The magnate's writing his apology now." The field marshal phoned the regimental colonel from his car. He used the word exemplary. I did not know what to say to that. I am not sure I said anything. I unbuckled the chin strap of the bearskin and let the weight come off my head for the first time in 7 hours, and I felt the small bell of it lift, and I felt my own hair underneath, damp at the temples. I gave him a nod. He gave me one back. That is most of what we say to each other in that gatehouse, in any weather. I walked the long way back to my quarters that night, across the inner court and through the cloister and out under the lime trees by the west wall, because I wanted the cold air on my face. I thought about Garin Vol. I thought about the cuffs and the click of them and the second click. I thought about how easy it would have been, in the third pace of that walk across the marble, to turn and put my forearm across his throat and put him on the floor, and how the regiment would have spent 6 months trying to undo what 1 second of my temper had done. I thought about the field marshal. I thought about the fact that he had walked, in formal dress, the length of a ballroom for a corporal he had never spoken to, because the corporal had been wearing the uniform of his division, and the uniform had been wronged. I thought about the small nod he had given me in passing, which was the only payment I would ever receive, and the only payment I would ever want. And I thought mostly about the post, about the hours of standing, about the cold of the cuffs and the warmer, slower cold of holding still while they closed, about the dark oil portrait of the old Duke and his 9 buttons, about a uniform that is bigger than the man inside it, and a man who is small enough on a good night to know it. That is the story. There is no twist after it. The magnate's apology arrived at 10 the next morning by hand, on heavy paper. Garin Vol's license review went the way the field marshal had said it would go. I went back to my archway the following Saturday and stood another 5 hours, and no one tried me, and that was as it should have been. The crown is not handcuffed at charity dinners. That is what the field marshal said. I have thought about that sentence many times in the years since. I think what he meant was simpler than it sounded. He meant, a country that wants to be a country puts a man in a red coat at an archway and asks him to stand still, and asks everyone who walks past him to remember why. He stands so that the country can remember. And when someone forgets, the country sends a man with 4 stars on a sash to remind them. I was the man at the archway. I did my job. The reminder was not mine to give. But I was glad that night that it came.